Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Tavis Leaf Glover, and today we're going to be covering a great painting by Rubens. This is the Hippopotamus and Crocodile Hunt, and you can see the hippopotamus here right in the center with the crocodile on the bottom. But it's a pretty complex composition, and we're going to go through all the design techniques. This is how I usually analyze them for the website, but I'll go through all the design techniques and show you how he incorporates them into this design to create visual clarity. So first off, before we get into dynamic symmetry, I always say that figure-ground relationship is the most important composition technique you should learn, because it deals with the subject and how it fits into the background and how everything kind of fits together like a puzzle piece. So right here we can see that the hippopotamus is clearly separated. If we look in the background, he's got the hippopotamus separated. Right here goes behind the horse, and then it's on that light background and it's a dark figure. We can see he's creating enough contrast. It loses contrast here, which is fine. That's a lost edge, but then he creates enough contrast. Going around, here's this foot, here's the other foot, and then it comes back around here. So it's got nice figure-ground relationship, even though it's a twisting torso of the hippopotamus and it's foreshortened. It's got nice figure-ground relationship on the head and the body. So nice job on that. A lot of his figures are pretty much twisting and turning, and that's adding to the romantic feel of his composition. None of these characters or animals are static. Even this dead guy down here, he's all twisted up on the bottom. So really interesting. He's capturing the figures and animals in a unique way with all these foreshortened features, like this horse. If we look close, this horse is foreshortened dramatically right here. Sometimes that can create some visual confusion, which we'll get into. I'll show you some errors that could be adjusted if he was fine-tuning this composition. But let's move on to the dynamic symmetry. And if you measure the dimensions of this image, if you divide these numbers into each other, you'll get 1.29, and that is very close to this root phi grid. Here's the basic armature with the baroque, the sinister, and then two reciprocals on each side. Then you've got the horizontals and verticals. But the ratio of the root phi is 1.272, and we can see it overlaid here. Some things are locking in, but I always try to break it down even more, because if you use these grids in drawing or painting, you know you can break these down even further and refine these smaller details. So I'm going to overlay the basic armature. This is the 4x underneath it, and that's 4 going on the bottom and 4 stacking on the side, which gives us 16 total within the mother. So that'll give them enough lines to organize this complex composition. So what's really interesting is we'll see all these areas locked in. You can see this dog locking in on that diagonal, creating that movement going from left to right. But what was interesting to me is that he's got every single eyeball from these characters, these animals, plus the human subjects locking in on the grid somewhere. So like even this one right here is locking in on the line. But if we zoom in, this eye, this one, these two, even this one, I forgot to mark. It was just interesting to me to see how all these eyes are locking into the grid. That's not coincidence, that's planned, and he's doing that on purpose. So I just thought that was interesting. But we've got some significant areas locking in the grid. This horizontal in the background, turn that off. We can see how it's locking in there. The hoof, the leg, this area of the leg, mouth, this exact diagonal of his cloth. You can see it locking in there. This guy's chin, this arm here, the same exact diagonal of that arm. So pretty interesting. Dynamic symmetry, when you use the grid like this in your photos or even in your paintings and drawings, if you're using the grid, you're promoting certain design techniques. And the first one we'll cover is Gamut, and these are repeating diagonals. You can see if I turn the grid on, the basic armature, you can see how they're paralleling this grid. The grid is where your gamut derives from. These are only 4 diagonals being shown, and it's not all the repeating diagonals like the smaller ones. These are just noticeable ones in the composition. But you'll see how he's paralleling the legs and using the same exact diagonal of the grid, and he's creating this hidden rhythm within the composition. So if you like this kind of stuff, there's links in the description below where I make things to help artists surpass their plateau and reach the master level. The grid also promotes 90-degree angles, so we can see a couple here. But we'll see the back of this dog is creating that diagonal. And then if we run our eyes down, we see the diagonal of the hippopotamus leg. That's creating a 90-degree angle there. We also have one here. This dog, it's kind of hard to see this dog right here. I wasn't sure what was going on there, but it's another dog. And you can see his ears and his snout right here. But his leg is coming up here, creating that diagonal, coinciding with this foot. And then it meets this hippopotamus leg, creating another 90-degree degree angle. And then we have this guy's arm running down, meeting this diagonal of the horse. So we've got a 90 degree angle there. So this creates a hidden strength within the composition. And the 90 degree angles have to be tilted like this, not straight up and down, but tilted, and that's how it works. The grid also promotes coincidences. So we've got vertical coincidences and horizontal ones. Just by looking at an edge, like the edge of this guy's face, and you run it down and you see what else it hits. So it's hitting the edge of this cloth here, and then it comes down and hits the edge of this material in the background. You can see it when I turn it off. You can see that line in the material. It's creating a coincidence there. So in the edge of this hippopotamus head, you run it up and it's hitting the edge of this horse, and then also the arrow and his arm. Follow this guy's arm down, it hits this guy's side of his face, comes down, hits the side of the mouth, comes down, hits the side of this leg here, and then you draw it even further down and it hits this material right here on the left side. Same with this, come down and you hit the right side of this hippopotamus. So you gotta look for these. They're hidden, and you're supposed to have these techniques hidden. It's like a magic trick. You don't want to really show it to the audience. The right side of this horse here comes down and hits this right side of this guy's head, and then same thing with this leg coming down, hitting his arm. And then we got these horizontals. We've got this guy's head, the top of his head running across to the top of his hair. This horse's hair comes around to the top of this guy's head. The bottom of this cloth, run it across, and it hits the top of this snout and then the eyeball. These are planned. They're not happenstance. Rubens is planning this in his composition. So this one runs across. See this contrast here? This contrast here runs across, hits the top of this guy's head and comes around and hits the bottom of the hippopotamus chin, and then goes over and hits this dog's leg right here. So it's perfectly aligned. Even hits the top of this dog's ear in the bottom of this here, and even the paw right here. So that's a really good one. And you're just looking for contrast where edge-to-edge relationships are created, and it doesn't have to be a high contrast, it can be low contrast. Like this area back here, that's low contrast. He's not drawing attention to it, but it's still coinciding with this guy's heel. You can run it across there. This guy's body, follow it across, and then it hits this guy's arm. You can analyze these master paintings, and it's weird that there's so many skeptics, but if they would just sit down and analyze the master paintings, that's one thing that they're not doing, and they're still skeptical, and it's hindering their growth as an artist. So a lot of artists will copy a certain aesthetic like Pintaminte or the brush strokes or something like that, but they're not copying the composition techniques, which is one thing they should be identifying and copying, is these composition techniques. Because if you go through hundreds of master paintings and analyze them for the same exact techniques, you'll start to see patterns forming, and all of these masters are using the same techniques. So it's pretty eye-opening once you start digging into it. Okay, now we can find the arabesque. Beautiful arabesque. You know, by just looking at it, you can see something special creating a lot of movement, and you can't really identify it, but it's there. So when we analyze it, we can see the arabesque is wrapping around all of these little characters and animals. So you can see it when I turn it on and off. It's really evident of where the arabesques are, especially the one in the alligator body. That's a really nice, elegant, and probably the only obvious one, but he's creating edge-to-edge relationships, creating this movement and unity across all of these characters with that elegant arabesque wrapping around everything. To find these arabesques, you can just blur your vision and try and see if you notice any movement. And when you do notice movement, like this alligator back, just follow it around, follow the contrast around, see where it leads your eyes. And this is where Rubens is trying to lead our eyes. So we follow the contrast around the alligator back. The tail leads us up to this contrast of the horse. That contrast leads us to this edge of the contrast to the left of his head, and then you can see how it's wrapping around his head there, and then this contrast leads our eyes down and then around. So you're just following the contrast around these edge-to-edge relationships and how he's leading our eyes around the composition. It's not by placing something on a third or anything like that. You have to design this stuff into your composition. So another thing he does is create ellipses. It's got two really nice ones hidden here, and when I turn that on and off, we can see how it's wrapping around these characters and hidden really well. And when you're trying to find the ellipse, you just blur your vision like you did in arabesque, and you look for movement in certain areas. So if you see the movement going up the side of the torso, up the arm, you just follow around, see where the contrast leads you. This looks like it's circling around here, this is kind of coming around here, and you can see how the arm is meeting that circular movement. So you're just tracking it around, and when you're in Photoshop, you can basically just draw an ellipse, use your marquee tool, draw an ellipse, move it around, and see how things line up. You can see how he's got these two here. When you turn it on and off, you can see how it's coming down the torso, coming up this horse head right here. And it's not a solid line, it's like a dot to dot line. It's these edge to edge relationships that create the effect. Got enclosures. These are triangular enclosures. Enclosures are similar to these ellipses. You're using edge to edge relationships, and he's creating these triangular shapes within the composition. And you can see it if you zoom out. You can see something's going on in this area here, this dog leading up here, and then we've got a solid line coming down here, this big thrust. So when we turn that on, we can see how he's creating those triangular enclosures. Even in this negative space in the arm, this arm here appears to be creating a triangular enclosure. This space inside of here creating a triangular enclosure. So just making note of all these triangular enclosures. And these are all designed before he's putting paint down to canvas. It's all designed beforehand. Got aerial perspective. We all know what that is. It's when the contrast is reduced and it creates a little bit of atmosphere and depth in the scene. You can do it with lighting effects, like on the side of this hippo, or in here where the contrast is reduced and it's creating that depth. Or you can do it by fading the background right here. This palm tree in the background, it's faded so it's sitting back into the composition rather than being high contrast like this tall grass here. And if you convert this to black and white and blur it, you can kind of see where he's planning the contrast. We see all the values there. We've got lots of contrast here on the right side. We've got it down here. This dog's high in contrast. This area is high in contrast. This area is. So you can see where he's trying to lead our eyes by simplifying the scene, blurring it, and we're able to identify where he's laying down that contrast to grab our attention first and keep our eyes moving around the composition. But definitely this dog is standing out quite a bit. That dominant diagonal adds to the effect. This area is standing out. And then we can check the edges for high contrast. Got a couple areas with high contrast on the edge. Not too bad, like this area down here where the cloth hits the edge of the composition. But he designed this so well with arabesques and ellipses. He could create high contrast here, but it's just leading our eyes back into the composition the way he's designed this. Really nice. It's got high contrast here where the horse's mane is near the edge of the frame, but he's controlling it and he's creating movement with all of the composition techniques. Alright, this is what I wanted to show you guys, the kissing errors. There's a lot of areas that are kissing and creating some visual confusion. So it's such a complex composition, it's likely that you'll get a couple errors and you won't be able to squeeze things where you want them, or you just get so far into the composition it would take forever to deconstruct and reconstruct things. But you can see here where the edge of the material is kissing the edge of this spear. Normally you would want overlap somewhere so it shows the viewer which object is in front of the other, just to create more visual clarity, or you would separate them a little bit more. This, where the spear head comes down and kind of coincides with the edge of this horse, could be a little bit better, because sometimes some of this stuff is hard to see. It's so complex and squished together. This area here is really busy, where the chin is kissing the edge of the leg. This area here, all you would have to do is probably just reduce the contrast here, probably just to make this pop out a little bit more. This area is a little awkward. Got this guy's half eye coming around this man's torso. Probably would want both eyes showing, maybe adjust his head so his eyes are down here perhaps and not overlapping weird right there. Right here is a little busy where the head of the horse is coinciding with the edge of this man's face, so we don't know if this gray hair belongs to the man or the horse. Kind of looks like it could belong to the horse too. This area is busy. We're not sure what's going on here. It looks like part of this man's robe, but it's a similar color as the horse, so it's kind of all blending together and creating a little bit of visual confusion. Right here, kissing on the edge. This is not enough overlap here, and then this is creating visual tension where it's not quite overlapping and it's not kissing. It's a little sliver of negative space. Probably would want to create this hoof down here if he could have and made the composition the same. This area here where it's coinciding with the edge of this alligator's leg, probably would want this sword maybe coming up here to be more clearly identified and separate from this crocodile. This area here where the tooth overlaps the spear, he's overlapped it, but it's kissing the edge of that spearhead. So I would just, if this were me recomposing it, I would have the spearhead probably off to the side and just separated so it's easier for the viewer to identify what's going on. And then this dog actually was hidden for about 20 minutes while I was analyzing this. I couldn't really understand what was going on there. I was looking at this leg and I was wondering where that leg was coming from, because the contrast of this leg is so high, and then then this shape here is kind of a mystery, but then I pieced it all together finally and saw the dog head there. So that was definitely visual confusion there. And then this dog, he's lacking contrast. You can't really identify his head or anything like that, so we'd probably design that different too. Even masters make some errors that, you know, don't really matter in the final scheme of things. It's still a masterpiece and it's not ruining anything, but he could create even more visual clarity if he needed to. Now we can look for the greatest area of contrast, see where he's leading our eyes. This is another video I have on YouTube. You can check that out and see how I did this in Photoshop to find the GAC, the greatest area of contrast. But you just blur the image, convert it to black and white, and then you can use this threshold adjustment layer to find where the lightest areas meet the darkest areas. And we can see that this light area is large and it's in between two dark areas, so that's creating a lot of contrast. Same with this area. So he's drawing our eyes to this dog and then this man down here. So that's where our eyes are going, that's where he's creating the contrast, and that's what his plan is, to lead our eyes around the composition. We've also got an area up here really close to the dark area, and then right here as well. So looks like 4 major spots, probably this one too, 4 or 5 major spots, and then this one up here is pretty close too. So I would say, since this one's on the diagonal, this dog is on the diagonal, it's high contrast, that's the main starting point for his composition that leads our eyes around. So if we turn the arabesque back on, we can see how it starts with the dog, and we're just wrapping around the hippopotamus, which is where he wants us to go, wrap around to the crocodile, which is where he wants us to go, and then down to this guy, which is where he wants us to go. And then our eyes just keep wandering around the composition, enjoying it. But that's it for today. I really appreciate the support, and this was from a comment below, so if you like any artists, leave a comment below, and I always save these and make a list, and I go through them and see what I can do. But thanks so much, guys. Take care.